Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world clings to a single comforting image. Two jets of light colliding in a blaze of destiny. The killing curse rebounding. The boy who lived walking out of the forest once more. This is the final article of faith, the last fortress of their collective courage. They are wrong. In the forbidden forest clearing, beneath branches that hold their breath, Harry steps forward, exactly as the stories insist he must. The Elder Wand gleams in Voldemort's skeletal hand. The Death Eaters ring them in an uneven circle, and the air hums with that familiar, terrible resonance of war. For one suspended heartbeat, canon and inevitability align. Expelliarmus against Avada Kedavra. Courage against power. Child against tyrant. But in this timeline, there is no elegant symmetry, no miraculous rebound, no secret arithmetic of wand law saving the chosen boy at the last possible second. Harry's Expelliarmus leaves his wand a fraction late, a fraction weak, its red light thin and exhausted after a night of attrition. Voldemort's killing curse meets it, eats it, and continues with methodical certainty, a tactically lethal line of emerald that does not bend, does not hesitate, does not care about prophecy. The sound is not a thunderclap. It is a soft, almost polite crack as the curse hits Harry full in the chest, greenwashes the clearing, then collapses into a darkness that feels heavier than night. For a moment, there is only silence, no cheering, no screams, only the faint rustle of leaves and the dull thud of a body that was supposed to be untouchable by death. Faces blur at the edge of that silence. Bellatrix's wild exultation freezes. Half-born, Lucius Malfoy stares as if an equation has just returned the wrong answer. Even the giants hesitate. On the distant battlements, Order members and students feel the magic shift, a cold, nauseating drop in the world's pressure, as the body of Harry Potter lies unnaturally still. Glasses askew, wand a useless line in the dirt. The myth of the boy who lived dies before anyone can name it. The prophecy, either must die at the hand of the other, seems, for one brutal instant, fulfilled in Voldemort's favour. As though the universe has finally chosen its champion, and it is not the child they pinned their hopes on. Every strategy, every whispered plan in Hogwarts stone corridors, every act of resistance premised on Harry's survival, collapses in that single second. Voldemort moves first. With a negligent flick, he lifts Harry's corpse into the air, turning the fallen boy into a banner of negation. The body rises above the clearing, above the tree line, visible to the shattered lines of defenders at the castle gates. Hogwarts, scarred, burning, still pretending to be a school, must now watch its last symbol hang lifeless in the sky. When Voldemort speaks, his voice carries with unnatural clarity, a dark authority riding the wind up to the towers. He does not gloat. He enumerates their numbers, their injuries, their dead. He announces that resistance is now mathematically impossible. that their final weapon has been broken, that the war is over by every metric that matters. It is the language of inevitability, delivered beneath a floating corpse. And yet, beneath the horror, something in the air does not settle. The Elder Wand pulses with a faint, discordant resistance, a soul resonance out of tune with its master. The almost complete destruction of the Horcrux network leaves a peculiar vacuum, as if an unspoken rule of magic has been bent but not yet allowed to snap. In the uneasy quiet after the Dark Lord's declaration, the world itself seems to hesitate, as though Harry's death is not a conclusion but the opening line of a darker, unwritten prophecy. Tonight, the boy who lived has died. The question is, what rises in the space his absence carves open, rewriting the prophecy? When destiny misfires, the world will later say that destiny was fulfilled the moment Harry Potter's body hit the stone. They will point to the words Sybil Trelawney spoke in a trance and claim the prophecy has run its course. They are wrong. We return to that original utterance, the axis on which the Slytherin timeline turns, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. In Canyon, this line is a theatrical threat with a hidden legal clause. In this timeline, it becomes a blunt instrument. Voldemort raises his wand in the forest, speaks the incantation himself, and Harry dies directly beneath the full, unmitigated weight of the killing curse. No shared wand core theatrics, no ricochet, no reprieve. To see the divergence, you have to strip away the cleverness Rowling built around it. In the books, Harry's survival is a technical miracle, Lily's blood magic running in Voldemort's veins, the accidental Horcrux in Harry's scar, a network of protections that turns neither can live into both can briefly coexist while paperwork is processed. In this reconstruction, that scaffolding is removed with methodical certainty. Dumbledore never had time, or perhaps never had the ruthlessness, to anchor Harry's survival to Voldemort's resurrected body. The Horcrux within Harry has already been excised by prior events. There is no fragment left to intercept the spell. Avada Kedavra, at last, behaves like what it was always meant to be, an ending, clean and absolute. On the surface, the prophecy seems satisfied. One has died at the hand of the other, and the survivor walks back to the castle as a living contradiction of every hopeful reading of fate. Yet magic in this world is not merely a toolkit. It is a narrative engine that resents unresolved patterns. Here we introduce a concept that unspeakables would whisper about in the deepest chambers of the Department of Mysteries: prophetic inertia. The idea that once a prophecy has bent reality into a particular shape, that shape retains momentum, hunting for completion even after its apparent conclusion, like a spell whose echo still seeks a target. Under prophetic inertia, either is not a fixed name, but a role. Harry was one candidate for that role, a masterpiece to be moulded by circumstance into destiny's instrument. When he fails, when the weapon breaks in the forest, the universe does not simply shrug and accept Voldemort's permanent dominion. It begins, quietly and with a dark, cold patience, to search for another fulcrum, another either whose sole resonance can counterbalance the Dark Lord's existence. The hinge is precise. May 2nd, 1998, at the Battle of Hogwarts. A single misalignment of wand movement, a fractionally weaker Expelliarmus, in the courtyard confrontation that never quite turns Voldemort's curse back on him. In canon, that microscopic geometry crowns Harry the victor. In this timeline, the angle is wrong by less than a degree, and an entire civilization's fate slides into a different channel. The castle that should have become a monument to resistance calcifies instead into a fortress of imposed order. Retroactively, Harry's life is recast. He was never guaranteed to win. He was an attempt. Prophecy in this reading is not a promise, but an experiment conducted on human lives. Harry Potter was a weapon being polished in the dark by forces far older than Hogwarts, deployed to correct a cosmic imbalance that Voldemort's first rise had created. The experiment fails. The imbalance remains. Now the world must continue under the rule of the one destiny tried and failed to kill. And as the dark mark hangs over the Ministry and Hogwarts alike, prophetic inertia begins to tug at other lives. A Longbottom, a Malfoy, a Muggle-born strategist, tracing patterns in the silence after war. The prophecy has not ended. It has simply reassigned its question. The next section will follow that question into the corridors of power as Voldemort consolidates his victory, while fate quietly assembles its replacement, either in the shadows. The fall of Hogwarts, surrender, spectacle, and silence. The lie dies before Harry does. In the instant the killing curse lands and does not rebound, the entire war inhales. When his body hits the stone, the world exhales into a silence so complete, it feels orchestrated. For a few stunned heartbeats, they tell themselves, this is another feint, another wand trick, another layer of Dumbledore's invisible chessboard. They are wrong. Word moves faster than curses. From the forest edge to the shattered courtyards, from the astronomy tower to the smouldering entrance hall, the message propagates with brutal, methodical certainty. Harry is dead. There is no secret plan, no hidden Horcrux waiting to flip the board. In this timeline, the prophecy's ambiguity has resolved in the Dark Lord's favor, and everyone who was fighting on the assumption of a miracle realizes they have been wagering lives on a story they needed, not a strategy they possessed. Morale does not simply fall, it implodes. Duels stagger and falter as wands lower mid-curse. A Hufflepuff drops his shield to sob. Two auras disapparate on the spot, splinching themselves against the retuned anti-apparition wards. The last pockets of resistance are not overwhelmed by superior tactics, but by the psychic whiplash of discovering that hope itself was a miscast charm. Voldemort walks through this ruin with ceremonial slowness, as if inspecting a masterpiece to be molded. His voice, magnified and cold, offers what he calls mercy. Lay down your wands, step into the great hall, and live. Resist and die as uselessly as your champion. It is not a negotiation. It is a ritual of authority. The Great Hall becomes the stage of his coronation by terror. Harry's body is suspended above the staff table, held aloft by invisible bindings that twist him into a grotesque parody of flight, a weapon being polished in the dark one final, posthumous time. Beneath him, one by one, the pillars of the old order are driven to their knees. McGonagall's lips are white with the pressure of words she will not give him. Kingsley's shoulders shake once, then lock. The surviving Weasleys collapse in a broken cluster, red hair stark against the flagstones, forced to bow beneath the dangling silhouette of the boy they treated as a son. Around them, Hogwarts is rewritten in real time. The banners of the four houses descend in a rain of charmed ash, curling and blackening mid-air before vanishing. Above the staff table, a colossal dark mark unfurls, its serpent skull grinning where the school crest once presided. Only Slytherin's banner returns, subtly altered, the serpent elongated, its features sharpened into Voldemort's own, soul resonance made heraldic. Deep in the stone, wards groan as they are retuned, accepting one master, one signature, one tactically lethal will. The survivors fracture along internal lines that have nothing to do with house colours. Neville stands as if turned to granite, the sword of Gryffindor still in his hand, knuckles bloodless, fury so vast it has not yet found language. Hermione's eyes flicker ceaselessly, mapping exits, counting wands, recalculating a Horcrux hunt that has ended one step too soon. Somewhere in that storm of thought, a new resistance is already being drafted. Ron simply breaks. His grief is not poetic. It is raw, animal, a howl strangled into silence as he stares up at the boy who died so that nothing could be finished. When Voldemort finally speaks the new law of the land, he does it with bureaucratic calm. Hogwarts, he declares, is now the capital of magical Britain, a fortress and throne in one. The ministry will persist as an administrative outpost, an office block processing the paperwork of submission. This night, he announces, will not be remembered as the Battle of Hogwarts, a phrase implying contest and uncertainty, but as the night magic chose its true master. The declaration lands like a spell with no counter curse. But power claimed in one night must be maintained in 1,000 days, and as the dark mark burns above the Great Hall, the next section will follow the quieter, more dangerous resonance spreading through corridors, ministries, and alpine estates alike, where not everyone who kneels intends to stay on the floor. From Shadow War to Open Empire, Voldemort's first 100 days. In the echo that follows Harry's execution, the war does not end. It ossifies. The dark mark above Hogwarts becomes less a threat than a flag, and within hours, the wizarding world discovers that what felt like occupation was merely the rehearsal. In this timeline, Voldemort does not bother with shadows once his last true rival lies broken on the stones. By dawn, the Ministry Atrium is a procession ground. Pious thickness is paraded like a malfunctioning puppet, then ceremonially replaced, not by another minister, but by a proclamation. The Wizengamot is retained as an advisory relic, while Tom Marvolo Riddle assumes the title of Supreme Magical Regent. The fiction of a captured state is discarded. Authority is no longer borrowed. It is declared naked and absolute from a throne conjured where the fountain of magical brethren once stood. The first week is law, not spectacle. The Muggle-born Registration Commission is dissolved with a flick of Nagini's tail and reborn as the Muggle-born Excision Act, a masterpiece of bureaucratic cruelty. Blood traitor quills scratch out names. Wands are confiscated in public ceremonies that masquerade as security reviews. Vaults at Gringotts are frozen, then quietly reassigned to loyal families. Those with Muggle parents are presented with 3 protections: exile through sealed ports, conscription into Labour battalions, building a new Azkaban on the mainland, or humane termination for those deemed magically volatile. The language is antiseptic. The outcome is war by paperwork. Hogwarts, meanwhile, must be remade from fortress into factory. Snape's body, or his unexplained absence if he fled into the dark, creates a vacancy too dangerous to leave to any single ego. Voldemort answers with a headmaster's council, a triumvirate whose very structure is a warning. A Carrow oversees discipline and ideological purity. A coldly efficient curse breaker from Gringotts designs tactically lethal dueling curricula. And, in a gesture that shocks even the Death Eater inner circle, Draco Malfoy is installed as the youthful face of reform. Classrooms become war rooms. History of magic is rewritten as a chronicle of bloodline destiny. Defense against the dark arts abandons the pretense of defense. Students are ranked by kill potential, their adolescence harvested as a weapon being polished in the dark. Simultaneously, the Order of the Phoenix is recast from nuisance to existential threat. Within the first 100 days, a special tribunal brands it a terrorist organization, its sigil displayed beside the dark mark as a binary of order versus chaos. Bounties are posted on surviving members: Kingsley, Hermione, Neville, any Weasley who has not already fallen. Lee Jordan is dragged before a reconstituted Wizengamot in a trial designed for the wireless. He is accused of inciting insurrection through subversive broadcasting, his defiance edited into propaganda. The Weasley name itself is prescribed. To shelter a redhead is to invite Azkaban's new mainland gates. Beyond Britain's wards, however, the resonance is not entirely silent. Whispers circulate through the International Confederation of Wizards. Concern, committees, carefully worded communiques that condemn domestic excesses while avoiding the word conquest. They are wrong to think they have time. Voldemort reads their hesitation as invitation, a window in which the Slytherin timeline can harden into precedent before anyone dares to intervene. The next phase will trace what happens when that window begins to close, when external pressure meets an empire already baked into law, and resistance must choose between martyrdom and mutation. Life under the dark mark. A nation learns to whisper. The window does not slam shut with a bang. It narrows with a bureaucrat's pen. Within weeks of the final battle, life under the dark mark acquires a timetable. At Hogwarts, the bell schedule survives, but the content of those hours is weaponized. Breakfast in the Great Hall now begins under a floating banner of green and silver, the enchanted ceiling locked in a perpetual, clouded dusk. After porridge comes recreational dueling, a mandatory spectacle where children are marched between house tables and ordered to hex one another for applause that never quite sounds, voluntary. Failure is not a grade, it is a bruise, a cruciatus, a public shaming beside the staff table, where Voldemort's chosen overseers sit in methodical certainty, noting who hesitates before casting a blood-boiling curse at a classmate. Cruelty becomes extra credit. Inventive sadism is praised as initiative. Defense against the dark arts is quietly renamed Applied Magical Supremacy, its curriculum reframed as case studies, in how superior blood and superior will should subjugate the weak. In this timeline, pedagogy is merely propaganda with homework. The ministry reflects the same logic, scaled up and lacquered with legality. Auras are summoned to a vaulted chamber and handed wands and parchments in the same gesture. Swear an unbreakable oath to the Dark Lord's enduring authority, or surrender your badge. Some comply, eyes hollow. Others refuse and simply do not walk back out. Their posts are filled by peacekeepers, robed in standardized black with featureless masks. Death Eaters rebranded as civil servants who patrol Diagon Alley and Nocturne Alley with equal entitlement. They expand their routes to Muggle-adjacent streets, watching for blood traitor activity with tactically lethal calm. A wizard father lingering too long near a primary school. A witch buying too many batteries. A surname that appears on an old order roster. Each becomes pretext for a raid. The law is not a shield, it is a net. Inside homes, the hierarchy fractures. Pureblood dynasties, like the Malfoys, regain their gilded prominence, yet their manor feels less like an estate and more like a glass-walled fortress. Every dinner a performance for unseen observers. Half-blood families learn to flatten their histories, trimming away Muggle grandparents in conversation as if excising diseased tissue. Muggle-borns do not adapt, they disappear. Their cottages stand open, photographs torn from frames, ministry records quietly overwritten, as though the children never received their letters. Under this pressure, language mutates. Witches and wizards cast muffliato before they complain about rationing, before they whisper a dead friend's name, before they dare to argue that this war was not inevitable. Birthdays are celebrated in basements, without candles. Weddings are held under disillusionment charms, in empty fields. The silence becomes hereditary. A generation of children grows up never hearing Dumbledore's name spoken aloud, only referenced as the Old One or the Mistake. Yet erasure is imperfect. In the corners of dormitories after curfew, in the back rooms of shuttered shops, another narrative begins to circulate. Harry Potter as forbidden legend. Officially, he is a traitor whose arrogance doomed the resistance. Unofficially, his story fractures into dangerous variations. Some insist he survived, a weapon being polished in the dark, waiting beneath the castle or beyond the wards. Others claim his death created a soul resonance, a curse threaded into Voldemort's victory that will one day demand balance. The regime responds with posters, with lectures, with mandatory viewings of a staged last duel that proves his annihilation. They are wrong to think repetition kills belief. In the Slytherin timeline, every attempt to scrub Harry from memory only refines him into myth, a masterpiece to be moulded not by propaganda, but by hunger. And in that widening gap between the story the Dark Lord authorizes and the stories people actually tell, the first, almost invisible, architecture of resistance begins to take shape. Survivors in the dark, Hermione, Ron, and the Shattered Order. The myth of Harry hardens in absence. The reality of his friends hardens in hiding. In the Slytherin timeline, the world tells itself the war ended on the night the boy who lived finally died. They are wrong. The war simply lost its protagonist and slid underground. Hermione Granger vanishes from public record within 72 hours. Officially, she is presumed dead in the chaos of Hogwarts' fall. Unofficially, she becomes the architect of a network the new regime cannot quite map, only feel as a constant abrasion against its authority. The old DA coins reappear, not as sentimental relics, but as infrastructure, repurposed protean charms, layered with new, viciously precise arithmancy, turning a schoolboy signaling system into a tactically lethal grid. 1 tap signals a safe house, 2 an extraction route, 3 a ministry patrol pattern. No cell ever sees more than its own sliver of the design. Hermione hoards the total pattern in a mind trained by war and refined by terror, a weapon being polished in the dark. The safe houses she curates are not romantic bolt holes, but way stations in a quiet evacuation campaign. Muggle-borns disappear from censuses, from school rolls, from interrogation chambers, shunted through back alley flu hubs, disused alpine portals, and Muggle train lines threaded with notice me not fields. To the Ministry, it looks like demographic decay. To Hermione, it is a slow bleed that denies Voldemort a generation of victims and test subjects. Ron Weasley does not vanish. He explodes. In the immediate aftermath, his grief is so incandescent it almost kills him. He volunteers for every raid, every half-planned strike, every rumor of a Death Eater convoy. Twice he is dragged back from the edge of capture, once with his wand snapped, once with a killing curse having shaved a line of hair from his temple. This is not heroism. It is attempted self-annihilation with better branding. Only when a disastrous skirmish in Diagon Alley leaves 3 younger fighters dead does something in Ron lock into place. The recklessness remains, but it acquires methodical certainty. Within a year, he is the field commander of what is left of the Order, orchestrating sabotage runs that collapse flu nexuses, fry record archives, and turn ministry supply chains into a permanent state of controlled failure. Parallel to this, Neville Longbottom does the unthinkable. He goes back to school. Voldemort, amused by the boy who dared draw Gryffindor's sword and somehow survived, allows it as a spectacle, a living cautionary tale. In this timeline, that miscalculation becomes structural. Neville accepts a junior herbology post under Caro's supervision, moves through the corridors as a tolerated embarrassment, and quietly begins redrawing the old DA sigil on desk bottoms and stairwell stones. Dumbledore's army returns, not as a teenage club, but as a generational project nested inside the castle fortress itself. Detention becomes recruitment. Forbidden Forest expeditions become weapons training under the cover of botanical surveys. The Weasleys fracture under pressure, yet refuse to break. The burrow does not simply burn, it is levelled in a public demonstration. Dark marks hanging over the crater for a week as a warning. Arthur and Molly vanish into the same fog of rumour that once cloaked Sirius Black, surfacing only as whispers of a grey-haired couple moving between safe houses, patching wards and people with equal stubbornness. George, robbed of his twin and his shop, turns grief into industry. Joke products re-engineered as black market resistance tech, skiving snack boxes that induce symptoms mimicking unforgivable side effects. Shield hats calibrated to flare only against green light. Every laugh his wares provoke is edged with terror. Ginny, officially listed as missing presumed subjugated, becomes a name on wanted posters from Nocturne to Hogsmeade. Her hit and run strikes on snatcher camps, feeding a legend that refuses to die with her brother. It all converges, one rain-slick night, in a ruined safe house on the outskirts of Ottery St. Catchpole. The roof is half gone, the wards flicker, and the remnants of the Order gather around a table scarred by both spellfire and family dinners long past. Hermione lays out a hand-drawn map, not of territory, but of objects and failures. The diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem. A litany of victories that should have ended the war. Her voice, when it comes, is flat. There was one more. Something they missed. Somewhere in the dark, Voldemort's soul resonance still anchors him to the world, and every triumph they steal is, at best, a rehearsal. The room falls into a silence so complete, it feels like a spell. Then Hermione slides a final, blank parchment into the center of the table, the space where the unknown Horcrux should be, and asks the only question that matters. How do you hunt a masterpiece you cannot even name? The last Horcrux, a hidden flaw in an unkillable tyrant. Hermione answers her own question with the cruelty of precision. You begin by admitting that the war everyone thinks is over has not actually started. The courtyard duel, the green flash, the fall of Harry Potter, those are prelude, not conclusion. In this timeline, Voldemort walks away from the ruins of Hogwarts, believing himself unshackled from death. They are wrong. Canon insists on a near-perfect victory lap for the trio. Diary in the chamber, ring in the gaunt shack, locket from the cave, cup from Gringotts, diadem from the room of requirement, and the accidental fragment burned out of Harry's scar when he walks willingly into the forest. Those anchors are gone here as well. Even in the Slytherin timeline, the methodical certainty of Dumbledore's long game still erodes 6 of 7 chains. The basilisk fang still pierces the diary. The fiendfire still eats the diadem. Harry's death still annihilates the peace inside him. And yet, Voldemort lives. Hermione's quill traces a 7th empty circle. Her research, now conducted in cellars and safe houses instead of the Hogwarts library, has led her into the obscure mathematics of soul resonance, esoteric arithmancy papers, half-burned unspeakable reports, and one French treatise Bellatrix once stole from an Alpine vault. Together, they outline a theoretical horror, redundant soul anchors, a Horcrux system not built on a sacred septet of treasured artifacts, but on a lattice of backups and decoys, designed by a man who trusted nothing, not even his own memory. The premise is chillingly simple. If one accepts that Voldemort is both paranoid and brilliant, why would he limit himself to visible trophies? Why not bind a sliver of soul to a ward stone sunk deep in Hogwarts foundations, humming beneath the Great Hall like a buried heart? Why not slip a cursed page into a nondescript charms compendium in the restricted section, indistinguishable from 1,000 others, until it is read aloud? Why not, in a final act of contempt, use a living vessel, a Kneazle, a condemned Muggle-born, a captured Auror, turned into a walking, unwilling phylactery, whose destruction would be indistinguishable from murder? The pattern interrupts the comfort of prophecy. Either must die at the hand of the other, becomes legalistic, rather than liberating. Harry fulfilled his half, and the Dark Lord simply failed to stay dead. The Resistance can no longer frame their objective as a single decisive strike. Every raid, every prison break, every infiltration of the Ministry's new Black Wall fortress must serve two purposes at once: attrition and archaeology. They hunt not only for weaknesses in Voldemort's regime, but for footnotes in old Death Eater correspondence, for slips in drunken boasts, for fragments of ritual procedure muttered by terrified captives who remember only the smell of blood and cold stone. This is the quiet irony. Even Voldemort's victory corrodes his certainty. Redundant soul anchors, if they exist, were crafted in another life when he was Tom Riddle playing God with numbers and knives. Decades of war, resurrection, and obsession have layered over that original calculus. It is entirely plausible that the Dark Lord, who now rules Britain, does not recall every ward he wove, every sacrifice he demanded, every experiment he abandoned as a failure, which means the final flaw in an unkillable tyrant may not be found in open battle at all, but in the forgotten corridors of his own past, buried in Hogwarts' stone, inked between the lines of an old diary entry, or carried, unknowingly, by someone he dismissed as irrelevant. A house elf, a squib, a boy who once fetched his tea. The Resistance does not know the name of that last anchor yet, but as Hermione folds the blank parchment and tucks it beside maps of the Ministry and class lists from Hogwarts, the objective crystallizes with lethal clarity. They are not trying to kill a man. They are trying to complete an unfinished equation. And somewhere behind the Dark Lord's crimson eyes, an answer he has forgotten is already waiting to be used against him. Neville, the reluctant beacon, a new symbol of hope. The equation is interrupted by an almost forgotten variable, a boy with a broken nose and a borrowed sword. Neville's canon-defining charge across the courtyard still happens in this timeline. The blade of Gryffindor still arcs through the air, still shears through Nagini's neck, still severs the last visible tether between Voldemort and immortality. But here, it does not clear the way for Harry's return. It becomes the last bright act before the world goes dark, a flare against an oncoming eclipse. In the stunned silence that follows the snake's death, the battle does not turn. Harry is already falling, the prophecy already collapsing inward. Voldemort staggers, howls, and then, with methodical certainty, annihilates the boy who was supposed to end him. The narrative the world clings to for a few frantic days is simple. Neville Longbottom killed the Dark Lord's final Horcrux. Surely destiny will finish the equation. They are wrong. Neville knows it the moment the killing curse hits Harry and nothing shatters except hope. There is no soul resonance, no cosmic recoil, only the burnt meat smell of finality. In the weeks that follow, as Voldemort tightens his fist around the Ministry and drapes the dark mark over Hogwarts like a new school crest, Neville discovers that survival is not a coronation. It is a sentence. Internally, he resents the whispers that crown him in Harry's absence. He knows he is not a weapon being polished in the dark, not a masterpiece to be molded by prophecy. His power has always been smaller, stubborn, the refusal to move when terror says run, the loyalty that keeps him standing in front of people more brilliant than he will ever be. He understands plants and people who have been trampled. He does not understand grand strategy, and the comparison to Harry feels like an accusation he cannot answer. Under Voldemort's regime, Hogwarts becomes a fortress of obedience by day and a pressure cooker by night. Neville is allowed to remain as a junior herbology instructor, a living reminder of the Dark Lord's contempt. This is the boy who dared to swing a sword. See how he bends now. In this timeline, that calculation misfires. The greenhouses become his quiet front line. Venomous Tentacular accidentally lashes a Carrow. A batch of seemingly mundane fertilizer destabilizes wardstones, creating blind spots for smuggled wands. The Room of Requirement, once a sanctuary for adolescent rebellion, is repurposed into a rotating network of bunkers, training halls, and infirmaries. Neville learns to grow mandrakes, not for exams, but for ambushes. Students begin to look at him the way an earlier generation once looked at Dumbledore, but with a crucial difference. No one believes Neville is infallible. They watch him flinch when first years are forced to duel for the Carrow's amusement. See his hands shake after he obliviates a captured Muggleborn's parents to protect them. His authority comes not from invincibility, but from visible fracture. If he can still stand, perhaps they can too. Rumours seep through the underground like water through stone. A new seer in Nocturne, drunk on her own visions, has spoken Neville's name, not as saviour, but as the one who holds the line until the world remembers how to fight. It is a smaller destiny, almost insulting beside Harry's legend, yet in the Slytherin timeline, it may be more dangerous. A chosen one can be killed. A line that refuses to break must be worn down inch by inch. Neville does not believe in prophecy, but as he locks the greenhouse doors each night and counts which students have not returned, he begins to act as if the rumour is an order he cannot disobey. Somewhere beyond the wards, other survivors are listening, recalibrating their own equations around this reluctant beacon. And one of them is already mapping how to turn that fragile symbol into a catalyst. Draco, the conflicted heir, inside the Serpent's Court, somewhere beyond Neville's greenhouse wards, while rumours crystallize into prophecy. Another heir is being repositioned like a tarnished chess piece. The world assumes the Malfoys are finished, bankrupted in reputation, if not in gold by their failures at the Manor and their hesitations during the Battle of Hogwarts. They are wrong. In this timeline, Voldemort does not discard old pureblood names. He repurposes them. Lucius is quietly sidelined, Narcissa tolerated as decor, and Draco, thin, pale, eyes permanently ringed with sleepless calculation, is hauled back into favour because the regime has discovered a simple, brutal truth. Terror wins wars, but it does not balance ledgers. Draco's new domain is administrative, not glamorous. At first, he is placed in a restructuring unit at the Ministry, documenting Muggle-born asset seizures with methodical certainty, converting homes and businesses into line items on a conquest ledger. Later, after several senior enforcers prove tactically lethal but logistically incompetent, he is reassigned to Hogwarts as an overseer of student discipline and ideological compliance. The Great Hall becomes a courtroom, the corridors a laboratory for fear. Draco signs the orders that send trembling first years to practice cruciatus on vermin. His signature is always neat. Externally, he functions as a weapon being polished in the dark, a pure-blood administrator whose authority flows from the Dark Lord's casual nods. Internally, the resonance is different. The boy who once could not kill Dumbledore now walks past the very tower where he failed, haunted by the image of a wand shaking in his own hand, by the echo of Snape's spell and Dumbledore's fall. Night after night, he dreams of the Room of Requirement, filling with fiend fire, of Goyle's screams, of the moment Potter, now a corpse in this Slytherin timeline, pulled him from the flames anyway. Fear of Voldemort pins him in place. Loyalty to his parents chains him to the Malfoy name. A growing disgust at daily brutality corrodes him from within. The result is not redemption, it is fracture. So the rebellions begin, not with shouted defiance, but with ink. A Muggle-born girl from Derbyshire, age 12, is marked deceased in transit in Draco's precise handwriting. In reality, her file has been quietly duplicated and redirected to a portkey route Hermione's underground somehow anticipates. A patrol schedule for the Forbidden Forest is compiled, then subtly misaligned. 5 crucial minutes of absence that allow contraband wands to cross the boundary. In defense lessons, when ordered to demonstrate lethal hexes, Draco misremembers the wand movements, leaving his peers marginally less effective, marginally less deadly. To Voldemort, Draco is a useful, if weak, pure-blood scion, an instrument of paperwork and precedent, not glory. To the Resistance, he is a problem set with no clean answer. Some in Hermione's network whisper that any Malfoy is an irredeemable collaborator. Others argue his leaks show a fragile soul resonance with the dead boy who once saved him. No one fully trusts him, Draco least of all. The tension crystallizes one evening when the Great Hall is repurposed yet again, this time as an arena. Students line the benches under a ceiling charmed to permanent thunderclouds. At the center, on the flagstones where Dumbledore once announced feasts, a captured DA member, bloodied, bound, still staring with inconvenient Gryffindor defiance, kneels before Voldemort. Malfoy, the Dark Lord murmurs, voice carrying effortlessly through the silence that follows. Demonstrate the Cruciatus. There is no theatrics, no screaming command, just expectation, heavy as a killing curse. Draco steps forward, every eye in the fortress of Hogwarts, tracking the heir who cannot decide whether he is a masterpiece to be moulded or a traitor in slow motion. His wand rises. His hand shakes. Somewhere in the rafters, a charmed coin warms against hidden skin, waiting for a signal that may never come. Draco opens his mouth, torn between open defiance and another compromise that will stain his soul further, and the next sound in the hall is not what anyone expects. Snape's ghosts, a double agent without a war. The sound is not a spell, but a body hitting stone. Harry's. The boy who lived becomes the weapon that failed, a masterpiece to be moulded that shattered in Voldemort's hand. In the stunned silence that follows, only one man in the castle understands what this actually means for the war. Severus Snape. In this timeline, his fate fractures along 2 equally merciless branches, both anchored in the same moment. Nagini's fangs in his throat, the shrieking shack reeking of blood and snake venom, and Voldemort walking away with methodical certainty that his loyal headmaster is finished. The Dark Lord believes the ledger is closed. They are wrong. In the first branch, the venom wins. Snape dies on that rotting floor, clutching at a life's work no one has yet understood. Harry, staggering from his own meeting with death, still collects the tears, still carries them, but the final battle turns, and he never reaches the pensieve. The memories remain sealed in a file, while Voldemort consolidates power, the Ministry becoming a fortress of surveillance and blood decrees. It takes Hermione and Neville years to risk the headmaster's office. When they finally pour Snape's memories into the stone basin, the revelation is not sentimental, it is tactically lethal. They watch Lily's green eyes in a Snape whose face is decades younger, hear the pledge that bound him to Dumbledore, and trace his double-agent dance through the corridors of power. What emerges is not a tragic love story, but a strategic manual, precise accounts of Death Eater rituals, the cadence of Voldemort's rage, the blind spots in his patrol patterns and his mind. Snape's life, preserved in silver strands, becomes a weapon being polished in the dark, teaching the underground how to move, when to vanish, and how to lie to a Legilimens and survive. The second branch refuses to let him rest. Nagini's bite is intercepted by a half-formed shield charm. Or perhaps a house elf bound to Hogwarts drags him away in a desperate, unsung act of rebellion. He lives, but barely. Scarred, hoarse, hunted by the regime he once fronted, Snape becomes a spectre at the edge of the Slytherin timeline, too compromised to stand with the resistance openly, too dangerous for Voldemort to remember for long. Here, Hermione and Neville do not discover him in a pensieve. They meet him in drainage tunnels, beneath Hogsmeade, in abandoned alpine safe houses, in the burned-out shells of Muggle libraries. He offers no comfort, only curt corrections and cryptic intelligence. Which corridor to avoid on Tuesdays, which junior Death Eater is susceptible to bribery, which curse Voldemort favours when he is afraid. He drills them in occlumency, with brutal efficiency, forcing them to relive their worst failures until their minds close like iron shutters. Under a Dark Lord who reads thoughts as easily as headlines, Snape's mastery of occlumency and legilimency becomes the last true counter-magic. His techniques spread through the underground like a whispered contagion. Eye contact broken at precise angles, emotional blank spaces cultivated as mental decoys, shared memories layered to create soul resonance that confuses invasive probes. Resistance cells become small fortresses of silence in a world of exposed minds. Dead or alive, one insight threads through all his teachings. Voldemort's remaining weakness is not a locket or a snake, but a psychological fracture. The Dark Lord can catalogue fear, ambition, and greed with terrifying clarity, yet love, loyalty, and deliberate sacrifice register to him only as errors in the data. Snape, who built his entire second life on loving a dead woman and protecting the child of his rival, understands that this blind spot is exploitable, perhaps more than any Horcrux ever was. Somewhere, in a tunnel or a memory, he outlines the same cold thesis. The only power Voldemort cannot predict is the choice to lose. The question is who, in a world already broken by Harry's fall, is still willing to pay that price. Beyond Britain, when the Muggle world starts to notice, the illusion that Britain's fall is a contained tragedy lasts exactly 3 days. In those 72 hours, foreign ministries, both magical and Muggle, tell themselves that this is an internal British matter, a civil war behind old stone walls and older wards. They are wrong. The dark mark over Hogwarts is not a local weather pattern. It is a signal flare to a watching world. Within the vaulted chamber of the International Confederation of Wizards, the debate fractures along an old, familiar line: preservation of secrecy versus prevention of war. Delegates from smaller European states argue for sanctions, wand trade embargoes, travel wards, the magical equivalent of blockades, while the French and German envoys, remembering Grindelwald's shadow over their own capitals, press quietly for covert operations. Open intervention would mean duels visible above London, dragons over Heathrow, soul resonance between two worlds that have been kept apart for centuries. If the Muggles see, the statute shatters. If the statute shatters, the next war is not just magical. In this timeline, Voldemort understands that better than most of his opponents. He has no interest in marching giants down the M1 in broad daylight. His approach to the Muggle question is elegantly vicious. Control from the shadows, never from the podium. Imperious civil servants misfile disaster reports. Regulators quietly approve unsafe infrastructure. A single altered memo diverts funding from flood defences to vanity projects. When bridges collapse or trains derail, it looks like corruption, negligence, the usual human decay. A weapon being polished in the dark does not announce itself. It simply ensures the target is already bleeding when the blow lands. Where fear alone is required, he authorizes precision terror. A gas main explodes beneath a dissident journalist's flat. A freak electrical surge incinerates a data center holding inconvenient investigations. Each incident is cloaked in plausible Muggle failure, yet threaded with just enough impossibility. A building fire that burns blue. A storm that forms a perfect circle over Westminster to leave investigators uneasy. On satellite imagery, some of his larger rituals register as brief, impossible weather anomalies. The Muggle world shrugs. The internet does not. Early cracks in secrecy spread through forums and grainy video platforms. A phone clip of a hooded figure apparating at the edge of a riot. CCTV that catches a killing curse as a frame of green static. Eyewitness accounts of men with skull tattoos walking unburned through a petrol inferno. Most viewers dismiss them as hoaxes. A minority begins to map them, to correlate dates, names, locations, building a conspiracy lattice that edges dangerously close to the Slytherin timeline's hidden architecture. Against this, foreign resistance is not theoretical, it is operational. French and German auras, officially on extended sabbaticals, cross into Britain underlayered glamours, running deniable missions to extract Muggle-born families and compromised officials. An American cell of unspeakables treats Voldemort's rituals as a research problem, studying the magical signatures of his storms from afar, terrified by their scale, yet intellectually unable to look away. Through smuggled journals and Protean-charmed coins, Hermione's fractured network links with sympathetic ministries in Madrid, Ottawa, even a cautious outpost in Tokyo, building a quiet alliance whose authority rests entirely on remaining invisible. Yet every operation carries risk. Each foreign wand raised on British soil is another thread tugging at the veil between worlds, another chance that a panicked muggle with a smartphone will immortalize the wrong duel at the wrong moment. And over all of it, a deeper, colder possibility gathers weight. If Voldemort completes his consolidation, if Hogwarts becomes an unquestioned fortress, the Ministry a flawless machine, the Muggle government a puppet theatre, his gaze will inevitably lift from Britain's coastline, not to conquer Muggles in open daylight, but to reorder the entire global magical order in his image, to turn the Confederation itself into a conquered parliament, bowing in methodical certainty to a Dark Lord who never needed to be seen to rule. A second prophecy. Destiny refuses to stay finished, yet even a global empire can be destabilized by a single voice in the wrong ward at the wrong hour. It begins not in a council chamber or a blood-soaked battlefield, but in the convalescent silence of St. Mungo's Janus Thicky ward, where inconvenient minds are hidden away like faulty wands. A minor seer, Madame Elspeth Crowell, whose only prior prediction involved a tea trolley derailment at King's Cross, stares through the ward window and, in this timeline, simply stops breathing. Her body continues. Her will does not. What speaks is something older. Healers rush to her bed as she jerks upright, eyes milk white, voice deepened by an alien resonance. The words spill out, fragmented, scraping at the air. The Lord who conquered death shall fall to the line of those who fell in his shadow, not the boy who died, but those who remember him. The unmourned death, the forgotten promise, one soul still bound. Then her throat closes, she collapses, and the ward returns to its practiced, professional denial. In the Slytherin timeline, the world believes the prophecy question settled. Harry died, Voldemort lived, and fate chose its champion. They are wrong. This new utterance does not anoint a single savior. It erases the very idea of a solitary chosen one, where the original spoke of neither can live while the other survives. This one moves in plural, almost contemptuous of singular heroism. Those who remember the boy who died, the line of those who fell in his shadow. Destiny, if it exists, has abandoned the myth of the lone weapon and turned its gaze to a collective. When a smuggled transcript reaches the resistant safe house, once the burrow, now a half-buried fortress of wards and concealed tunnels, the reaction fractures along old scars. Ron reads it once and shoves the parchment away with a hand that still shakes when anyone says Harry's name. To him, prophecy is a rigged game that already extracted its blood price. Hermione, surviving by turning grief into methodical certainty, dissects the syntax but refuses to kneel before it. Younger DA remnants, children who watched Harry fall in the Great Hall, cling to the words with almost religious hunger. If the universe has bothered to speak again, perhaps it has not accepted Voldemort's victory as final. The concrete stakes surface in the language everyone else overlooks. The unmourned death, the forgotten promise. Hermione hears not mysticism, but bookkeeping. They destroyed 6 Horcruxes with tactically lethal precision. One remains, bound, if the prophecy is accurate, not to an artifact, but to an absence, someone killed and never fully grieved. awe, a vow made and quietly betrayed. The last anchor of Voldemort's soul resonance may not be in a relic at all, but in the emotional archaeology of the war itself. Here the narrative must pause and widen. Is prophecy the architect of these events, or merely their historian, arriving late with poetic footnotes? Does Elspeth Crowell's trance create a future in which collective memory becomes a weapon being polished in the dark? Or does it merely describe the pressure points where human choices already matter most? The resistance does not know. But the moment this second prophecy circulates, their war stops being a simple contest of wands and wards and becomes something more dangerous, a struggle over which deaths are remembered, which promises are honoured, and who, if anyone, is allowed to finish a story the world insists is already over. 10 years later, Children of the Lost War. By the time the second prophecy has finished circulating through the resistance like a fever dream, a decade has passed, and Hogwarts is no longer a school. In this timeline, the castle has been reforged into an academy of the regime, less a sanctuary of learning than a vertically integrated factory for loyalty. The moving staircases still grind and pivot, but they now deliver children to classrooms where history of magic is recited as a litany of Voldemort's inevitability, and defense against the dark arts has been rebadged as applied enforcement. Portraits of the Dark Lord in various stages of calculated serenity line the corridors where Dumbledore once watched over students. The building has remembered what it feels like to be a fortress. The students who file beneath those portraits are the children of the Lost War. There is Alice Longbottom, whose father refuses to tell her why his hands shake when she mentions the Great Hall. Scorpius Malfoy, raised in a manor whose silence weighs more than its silver. And Mira, a half-blood whose Muggle mother, technically, does not exist in Ministry records. For them, Harry Potter is less a boy than a contested legend, a name that appears in banned pamphlets, in whispered bedtime stories, or not at all. The regime insists he was a deluded terrorist. Their parents' eyes say otherwise. They are wrong, and the children can feel it. Neville Longbottom, older, heavier around the eyes, still teaches herbology. Officially, he is a model of reconciliation, a former rebel rehabilitated by the Dark Lord's mercy. Unofficially, his greenhouses are where first years learn that plants can remember screams, that mandrakes flinch at the dark mark, that resistance has a scent. He moves with methodical certainty, hiding subversion in the care of roots and spores, a weapon being polished in the dark every time a child realizes the official history does not explain the way their parents flinch at thunder. Hermione Granger has become something else entirely. To the Ministry, she is a ghost story deployed to frighten ambitious Auror cadets. To the children, she is a name that appears in the margins of contraband textbooks, correcting, annotating, arguing. Sometimes, late at night, a patrol reports a bushy-haired witch in a tattered cloak on the 7th floor, vanishing into a wall that should not open. The room of requirement, insulted by a decade of ideological drills, has begun to wake. Draco Malfoy walks those same corridors as an administrator, his hair prematurely grey, his posture rigid with the strain of compromise. He signs off on dueling curricula that train 13-year-olds to disarm, maim, and kneel with tactically lethal efficiency, then goes home to a son who quietly asks why the portraits of traitors look so tired rather than evil. Each question from Scorpius lands like a curse Draco once refused to cast, reopening wounds that the Slytherin timeline never allowed to heal. The cracks widen in small, precise increments. A charms essay footnoted with a banned author. A study group that practices silent, stunning spells. A tattered copy of Dumbledore's speeches, passed hand to hand, its pages reinforced with Muggle tape. Forbidden books circulate through the dormitories. Secret dueling clubs choose rules that forbid unforgivables, in quiet defiance of the syllabus. The castle, which has witnessed 1,000 years of war, adjusts its staircases just enough that certain students keep finding one another. One of them is a boy named James Potter Finnegan, christened in defiance by a mother who swore she would never speak the dead hero's name again. He has grown up under the Dark Lord's banners, yet feels an inexplicable soul resonance whenever he sees the lightning-scarred graffiti older students etch in hidden corners. One evening, pursued by a prefect, he ducks into a dead-end corridor on the 7th floor, thinking only of escape, of answers, of a world that makes sense. The wall opens. Inside, the room is not a sanctuary, but a tomb. Piles of broken wands, scorched banners, a shattered glass case that once held a sword. At its center, half buried in rubble, lies a small, unremarkable diadem that hums with dark, familiar magic. When James reaches for it, the air itself seems to recoil. The final Horcrux has been under their feet all along. Something in the castle wakes up when he touches it. Far below, in the headmaster's office, every portrait of Voldemort opens its eyes at once. The hidden anchor, Hogwarts as Voldemort's final Horcrux. Every portrait of Voldemort opening its eyes is not a jump scare. It is a systems alert. The castle itself is reporting a breach. In this timeline, the world believes the Horcrux hunt is an archaeological exercise. Rings, cups, snakes, artifacts to be catalogued and destroyed, one by one. They are wrong. The true anchor of Voldemort's immortality is not a trinket. It is an infrastructure decision. Decades earlier, when Tom Riddle first walked these corridors as a professor in all but name, he discovered what most headmasters only suspect, that beneath the moving staircases and talking portraits lies a lattice of ancient wardstones, monolithic cores that hold Hogwarts' enchantments in methodical certainty. He does not merely admire them, he sees a masterpiece to be moulded. Riddle chooses one stone deep under the Great Hall, where the castle's weight and the school's collective attention converge, and performs a ritual that is neither purely sacrificial nor purely architectural. He binds a fragment of his soul directly into the ward matrix, fusing object, place, and spell into a single Horcrux. The result is not a cursed artifact in a cave. It is a living, pulsing soul resonance, threaded through every protective charm that keeps the fortress standing. This is why no one finds it. Standard detection spells glance off the wards as they always have, reading only Hogwarts rather than intrusion. Even the more desperate experiments by the Resistance, Hermione's modified protean chains, Snape's occlumency-driven sensing rituals, Draco's quiet attempts to map the foundations, register only the overwhelming background hum of the school's magic. To suggest that Hogwarts itself might house the last Horcrux borders on blasphemy. For those who survived the First War, the castle is the final neutral ground, the one place that refused to fall. The strategic implications are brutal. To shatter a conventional Horcrux is to risk a curse, an explosion, a backlash. To shatter this, one may mean collapsing load-bearing magic that has been accumulating for a millennium. The Resistance's war room calculations become almost absurd. How many lives, how many generations of education, how much symbolic authority are they willing to sacrifice to render Voldemort merely killable again? The Great Hall, where students are forced to duel for sport, becomes, in a cruel irony, the roof over the chamber that could end it all. This hidden anchor is also Voldemort's confession. For all his rhetoric about transcending his origins, he cannot leave this place. Hogwarts is the only location that ever resembled home, and so he conquers it, petrifies it, and then stitches himself into its bones. His greatest vulnerability is not sentimentality in the Gryffindor sense, but an obsessive need to dominate the site of his original rejection. He assumes, with tactically lethal confidence, that no one who truly loves Hogwarts would ever dare to wound it. The Slytherin timeline disagrees. The endgame now forming is not a lone hero facing a Dark Lord in open field, but an entire generation confronting the living, bleeding heart of their school. At some point, someone will have to look at those ancient stones and ask, is a castle worth a world? And when that question is finally answered, Hogwarts will either fall or wake up. Could Voldemort still fall? Weighing the odds of revolution, in the cold arithmetic of prophecy, Harry's death should have closed the equation. Either must die at the hand of the other. The Dark Lord shall mark him as his equal. The war will end. The wizarding world, in its terror, will whisper that it has. They are wrong. In this timeline, Voldemort's victory at Hogwarts does not erase the underlying mechanics of his own survival. It only delays their reckoning. For the Dark Lord to fall, 3 pillars must align with methodical certainty. The final Horcrux must be found and destroyed. A coordinated, multi-generational resistance must harden from scattered grief into doctrine. And Voldemort himself must commit a critical overreach, an act so arrogant it fractures the inner circle that sustains his power. Without all 3, the dark mark over the ministry becomes not a symbol, but a ceiling. The first pillar is brutally practical. Somewhere, perhaps in the alpine vaults of Gringotts, perhaps in a nameless Muggle ruin, one vessel of soul resonance remains. Hermione Granger understands this with clinical clarity. She becomes a weapon, being polished in the dark, directing clandestine research from safe houses and cellars, reconstructing Dumbledore's lost chain of inference from half-burned notes and the haunted memories of Severus Snape. Each smuggled page, each whispered clue about a ring, a locket, a diadem, is another chisel strike against immortality. Around her, the second pillar assembles itself. Neville Longbottom, who once swung the sword of Gryffindor in open defiance, now carries a different authority, the quiet, unglamorous moral gravity of the survivor who stayed. He speaks for the dead without deifying them, a living rebuke to both cowardice and fanaticism. Draco Malfoy, bound by name to the regime, yet privately sickened by its excesses, becomes the tactically lethal conduit between Voldemort's council and the underground. Misfiled orders, delayed patrols, a ward error that just happens to leave a gap on the night a Muggle-born family escapes. The younger students, who watched Harry fall, grow into adults who have never known peace, but also never known the paralyzing awe of Voldemort's first rise. Their imaginations are not shackled by the nostalgia of the pre-war world. They experiment recklessly. Protean-charmed coins extended into continental networks, Muggle encryption layered over wizarding owls, illicit portkeys hidden in children's toys. This is the Slytherin timeline's great irony. A regime built on fear inadvertently breeds a generation fluent in subversion. The third pillar waits inside Voldemort himself. His body, held together by rituals and rage, ages despite the Horcruxes. His regime relies on fear so absolute that it calcifies into long-term resentment. Every forced duel in the Great Hall, every public execution at the Ministry atrium, is a memory that does not fade. Crucially, he still cannot comprehend loyalty freely given. He reads the DA and the Order as anomalies, not blueprints. When he overreaches, perhaps by ordering the destruction of Hogwarts itself to break the last symbol of defiance, he will misjudge which Death Eaters care more about their children than their mark. Yet even if all three pillars align, the outcome is not a clean inversion of canon. The war may drag on for decades, a low, grinding attrition that leaves Britain a magically poisoned wasteland. Hogwarts might indeed fall, its stones shattered not in one operatic night, but over years of siege and sabotage, until the castle is a hollowed-out fortress no one truly owns. Voldemort may finally die on a nameless battlefield, not in a great hall of witnesses, but in the mud. His last breath swallowed by indifferent silence. And then, no golden age, only a shattered, traumatized society forced to rebuild without a single narrative of heroism to rally around, arguing in committee rooms and kitchen tables about how much darkness is acceptable in the name of safety. In this timeline, there is no guarantee of victory, only the certainty that resistance continues, not because a prophecy demands it, but because countless stubborn choices refuse to let the story end where Harry's body fell. The boy who lived becomes, in retrospect, not an ending, but an opening argument. The next move belongs to those willing to fight a war without the promise of a legend at its conclusion. Living with the dark ending. Why this what if matters. In the end, this dark arc begins with a silence. The silence after Harry's body hits the Great Hall floor, and Voldemort does not fall with him. From that instant, the familiar prophecy inverts. Either must die at the hand of the other is read as confirmation of the Dark Lord's survival, and a wizarding world rearranges itself around the assumption that destiny has spoken in his favor. They are wrong, but it takes years for the cracks to show. From there, the trajectory is brutally methodical. Hogwarts is not a sanctuary, but a fortress under the dark mark. Its stone corridors repurposed into dueling arenas, where children are forced to bleed for spectacle. The Ministry becomes an annex of Voldemort's will, blood status law written with bureaucratic precision. Muggle-borns processed, catalogued, disappeared. Britain settles into a low, terrified hum of compliance, while beneath the floorboards of this new authority, the resistance fractures into cells that do not yet trust one another enough to be a movement. In this timeline, the emotional center of gravity shifts. Neville Longbottom, who once swung Gryffindor's sword in a single luminous act, becomes a reluctant beacon spread thin over a long war, leading raids, losing people, learning that heroism measured in years is mostly endurance. Hermione Granger, denied the closure of Harry's victory, turns her intellect into infrastructure. Coin-based networks, smuggling lines across the channel, a cartography of safe houses etched in her memory like runes. Draco Malfoy moves through the regime as a conflicted insider, a man whose surname grants access, but whose conscience keeps sabotaging the very machine that protects him. Even the dead and half-dead are reconfigured. Snape survives as a rumor, a ghost mentor leaving occluded guidance in altered textbooks and potions margins. His presence, a kind of soul resonance that refuses to resolve. Voldemort, outwardly triumphant, discovers that winning the war only exposes the hollowness at his core. Each new decree, each public execution is a frantic attempt to prove that power can substitute for meaning. The discovery of a final, devastating Horcrux, bound to Hogwarts itself, requiring the school's destruction to unmake it, turns his victory into a trap he has built around his own immortality. The thematic reversal is complete. Instead of a universe bending toward one boy's sacrifice, this becomes a study in what people do when destiny fails them, how they redefine hope without prophecy, how they build resistance without a guaranteed savior, how they keep moving when the narrative refuses to promise catharsis. The Slytherin timeline was about a weapon being polished in the dark. This branch is about a world learning to fight without a masterpiece to be molded at its center. So the questions pass to you. In this fractured resistance, who should lead the final push? Neville, ground down but unbroken. Hermione, architect of the long war. Draco, tactically lethal on the inside. Or someone from the next generation, raised entirely under the Dark Mark's shadow? If destroying Hogwarts is the only way to annihilate that last Horcrux, do you strike the match or preserve the castle and accept an immortal tyrant? How dark can a what-if become and still feel like Harry Potter rather than an entirely different mythology wearing its robes? Picture the closing image, a scarred but still standing Hogwarts under a storm-choked sky, the Dark Mark hanging above it, not blazing, but flickering, as if even the magic sustaining it is uncertain which way history will tilt. In the courtyards below, small figures move, trading wands, maps, secrets. The story does not end here unless you let it. Continue this timeline in the comments. Tell us who lives, who falls, and what price you would pay to break this future. And then tell us which world you want opened next, which prophecy you want broken, which what if you want us to turn slowly into the next war.